Well, thank you. And thanks to everybody for joining us for this press conference to discuss legislation that I've introduced today to deal with the crisis that's before us. And certainly, I think we've all been moved in a dramatic way by the murder of George Floyd. And certainly, I know that image of the police officer with the knee on his neck and taking the life from him is something that is ingrained in my mind and will always be there, as I know it will be in so many Americans. And as a result of that, we've certainly seen an outpouring of emotion and peaceful demonstrations all across this country. And it certainly highlights the need for us to take action here in Washington and put forward common sense ways to address some of the systemic inequities that we see in the system, and make sure that we're able to provide police protection in a way that protects all Americans, no matter who you are, no matter where you live, that the police are able to do their job with professionalism and with integrity. And I think it's important to know that the overwhelming majority of police officers do that each and every day. But we know there are a number of things that we can be doing, and there are a number of pieces of legislation before us that are continually being introduced. I'm a co-sponsor of several pieces of legislation, some I've worked on for quite some time, like the National Criminal Justice Commission. But today I'm talking about a new bill that we are introducing to really enhance the ability for police departments to be engaged in community policing. We know community policing is a forward-leaning approach to providing protection and services to the community. It's about police officers and sheriffs knowing the community, understanding the community, often knowing individuals by name, and have built over the years, because of that community policing, have been able to build up the trust that is just simply so essential in our communities. In order to help and facilitate that community policing, it is certainly helpful to be able to recruit officers from the individual community in which they are serving. Certainly someone who has grown up in that community or has lived in that community for a long period of time brings a perspective to the police force or the sheriff's department that is absolutely invaluable. Right now, though, recruiting can be a real challenge. And I know Sheriff Napoleon will talk about some of the challenges related to recruiting folks into his department. And we want to provide tools to help law enforcement recruit the best and the brightest, and to help recruit folks from the community in which they will eventually serve. So that's the genesis behind the Strong Communities Act, which I've introduced, which will help local police departments recruit folks from the community. It'll provide financial assistance to help those individuals go on to get the training that they need to be part of the force. It'll pay for police academy. It'll pay for any other type of higher education related to criminal justice degree, so that they can become officers. This money will pay for that. There will be two stipulations. One, the individual has to come from that community. In fact, they have to agree to work for a police or law enforcement organization within 5 miles of where they live, so in the place in which they live. Then once they have completed the training and become part of that force, they then must agree to at least spending 4 years with that department. I'm confident as these individuals spend those 4 years in that department, they're likely to spend many more years. And it's an opportunity for us to give law enforcement agencies another tool, another way to recruit talented individuals to join the police force who understand the community intimately and look forward to being a part of the public safety system in that community. I have with me two folks who have joined me, Sheriff Napoleon and Reverend Bland, who will talk about how this legislation is important for the community. And I'd like to start with Sheriff Napoleon, Wayne County Sheriff, who has a long and distinguished career as a sheriff and brings incredible professionalism to the department. Certainly, Sheriff Napoleon, thank you for being here, and thank you for speaking about this bill. I think he's muted.
I just unmuted myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. First and foremost, Senator Peters, I'd like to thank you for asking me to join this very important conversation. I'd like to thank you for sponsoring this legislation because it's very near and dear to me. I don't want to dominate this call, but this is a topic that, quite frankly, it's a discussion that needs to be had. Those of us in leadership have been having such discussions surrounding these particular issues for many, many years. And while I think many of us understand the challenges that we have as leaders when it comes to recruiting, hiring, training, and retention, I think your bill goes a long way to addressing some of the most critical ones that we have. Also, I was fortunate enough to be recruited into a police department in 1975, 45 years ago, where community policing was a core tenet of that agency. As you have looked around the country and see the things that has happened in other places, while Detroit has not been without incident, you did not see some of the extensive violence that you saw in other communities. And quite frankly, I think that is because the city of Detroit is the beneficiary of over 45 years of a very active police community relationship that started when I was a young rookie in the police academy until the time I left as chief of police in 2001. Some of the things that your legislation addresses, Senator, is something that one thing that I am very, very adamant about. I believe that communities should be allowed to require that people who police their community live in that community. When I was hired in Detroit, residency was a requirement. I had to live in the neighborhood. I had to live in the city, which means my daughter went to school in the city of Detroit from K through 12. I go to church in the city of Detroit, so people see their police officer from the time I was a rookie police officer all the way up through to my tenure as chief and now as sheriff, living in the same place. I am like the neighborhood police officer because I live in the neighborhood, have been for the entirety of my career. I think that is critical to having trust of the community, to know that their police officers are not apart from the community, that they're a part of the community. But there are many challenges to the training. I have 2 full-time recruiters. And even with those 2 full-time recruiters out in the community, going to churches, to fraternities and sororities, to the military retirees and all kinds of folks throughout our community, lodges and fraternities. It's just, with all of that, 2 people full-time, I still have 200 vacancies in my agency today that I just cannot fill. Now, there are a lot of reasons for that. It's not the same profession that I joined 45 years ago as a high school graduate, which I appreciate your education piece because I was allowed to go through undergraduate school because of what was in place then, a program where police officers had, it was called the LEAP program. It sent me through college, and I think that education experience was a benefit to the Detroit Police Department. Obviously, I started as a rookie, came up to be the chief, continued my education, finished my law degree, and on and on. So to just put it in short, here are the things that I think, in a nutshell, will help change the perception of policing in America. Absolute right of citizens to demand that police officers live in their community. Focus on having police agencies that reflect the communities that they serve, that people see themselves as potentially being a police officer in the community that they work in. We also have to understand that we have some serious mental health issues in many of these communities, and you have to have programs to deal with people who are requiring treatment. And we have to decrease our appetite for incarceration. I run a jail now, and I can tell you in 11 years that I've been sheriff, I see things a lot differently. The prison population is exploding. We're doing the same things that we've done for 45 years, and it really hasn't changed very much when it comes to crime in many areas. So we have to really re-examine what we're doing. And your legislation goes a long way to accomplishing a lot of those goals. This is a discussion that I could have probably for days with you, Senator, but in light of the fact that you've got great people on this call, I'll reserve saying anything else. And I'm available to answer any other questions, but I have very strong feelings about this.
Well, I appreciate that, Sheriff Napoleon. Thank you for those comments. And you've expressed those strong feelings over the years as we've worked together on many issues. And certainly this is in the spirit of that. As a young person growing up in Wayne County, if they want to serve in their community, this allows them to have a path to get into law enforcement. And they will, as you mentioned, they will represent the community because they are part of the community. And now they can serve in a capacity to keep neighborhoods and communities safe and provide the valuable service that's so needed. So thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for what you do. And hopefully this helps you deal with that recruitment challenge that you mentioned of many positions that are unfilled that need to be filled. And hopefully this will provide an incentive. I also have with us the president of the Council of Baptist Pastors, Dr. Reverend Bland. Dr. Bland, thank you so much for being on this call as well. I know criminal justice reform is something that you continue to be passionate about. You always have been passionate about. We have engaged ourselves in discussions about making sure that there's accountability within police forces and having independence of an investigation. And that is another bill that I'm a co-sponsor of as a result of our conversation. So thank you, Dr. Bland, for being with us, and look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you to our Senator Peters, and to all of you who have joined this call, and as well as the press, and to my friend, Sheriff Napoleon, to my cohorts who work with me in the Council of Baptist Pastors, and to all of those who are sensitive about this most important issue that's regarding how do we deal with strong communities and safe communities in our area. Let me just say that first of all, I want to thank you for convening this call, and also to you, Sheriff Napoleon, for your remarks that signifies a long stellar history as a stellar sheriff in our community, knowing a simple fact, and that is community policing works. The issue of how we began to deal with the relationships that we have with our people and the people in our community is best done. And I think for many people, it's a no-brainer, but we have to just get back to some common sense solutions. This morning, I was watching CBS, Gale, and the news, and one of the clips they showed was a 10-year-old boy who was bouncing a basketball in the driveway. And when the police car started coming by, he hid behind his father's truck until the police car passed by. And then he commenced to going back to bouncing the basketball again. His father was looking outside the window and called his son and asked him, why did he hide behind the truck? And his 10-year-old son's response, honest response, just cavalier, was, well, the police killed George Floyd. I don't want that to happen to me. And so his view of a police car passing by was immediate threat, immediate fear. And this is a 10-year-old boy. He went right back to bouncing his basketball as if nothing happened, but it's already ingrained in him that the police are his enemy. That is not the experience I had growing up as a 10-year-old, south side of Chicago, and others. We had someone in our community who we knew, who we saw in the grocery store, who we went to church with, who knew my parents, who knew everybody else. And even if we got called in mischievous behavior, we could call them by name, and they had the ability to receive them. I mean, it was the days before cell phones, but it was a day and a time by which we called him and knew him. As a matter of fact, before I knew his full name, we called him Officer Friendly. And he would come by the school. He would have presentations. When we had career days, people wanted to be a police officer, but there was a relationship between the parent, the school, the church, the community, and he lived in the community. Home rule was something that was a given that took place in most of those times and days, so that residency was required. Every place where I've pastored, and my wife is a school teacher, and she teaches every place we've done over 36 years that we've lived in the community by which we serve the people. So we know their issues, we know their pains, we have relationship with them. And I think it ought to be the same with our police departments. The real issue of residency is, I think, an important issue. And I think your bill, being able to be brought to our community, helps us to deal with these issues. Racial diversity should reflect in our duty officers that we're dealing with and the members of the issues, even executive teams of the department, gender diversity, all of that is important. We have a city that's 85% African-American in its city, and it should be reflected in our police force. I know there are barriers to that, but programs like this go to help us to jump those hurdles, get back to what will be helpful, because there's a rule that I deal with in leadership that says rules without relationship equals rebellious behavior. And some of the rebellious behavior we're dealing with is there's no relationship. Some of these issues you can talk down. I notice that when some of the same police officers deal with other people for other cultures, they can talk to them. Some of them know them by name, and they don't have to deal with de-escalation by shooting first. They have the ability to know that this person is somebody that needs to go back home to their parents or to their wife or to their children. And so they find other ways to deal with it. The most recent we'll be dealing with Rayshard Brooks now. If you know the gentleman is already drunken and you know he's in his car and others toward that, at some point, it should be known that he ought to be able to live to see another day. Whether you agree with the behavior or not, shooting a person in the back because they have a taser, which is known to be a non-lethal weapon, is not the solution. And we are increasing these stories day by day. So Senator Peters, thank you. What you have done provides the kind of leadership at the United States Senate level to bring legislation. Because again, the protest that we're dealing with now is not enough. Protests without policy change equals normalcy. We're tired of the normalcy. We need to see the change, and we need to bring it back to community. Members of my church, young people, young adults, both male and female, I hear the stories all the time. People are afraid. One of them walk around with a copy of the US Constitution so they can read their rights in case they're pulled over. And people, when they're pulled up on, and it's true even for me and people on the call, some of the pastors who are with me, we should not live in a community where we are guilty until proven innocent. We should have the ability to have the freedom to live where we have the people who protect and serve. So I close my statements by thanking again you for this legislation. And the question is, how do we incentivize the changes that we want to have made? And I think that this legislation goes a long way to showing us how we do that, provide a means for us to do that. And the Council of Baptist Pastors, as you well know, we support this. Thank you for coming on our call and heeding our call to be able to reintroduce legislation that will be done and you following through. That's what we need. We need senators and legislators who actually will hold to their word and bring us common sense legislation that makes the difference. So then we can have it at the local, state, as other levels as well. So again, thank you for this opportunity. Pastor James Perkins and Pastor Keith Whitney are two co-chairs of our Political Action and Social Justice Commission. They join me in stating that, again, this is the first of many legislations, and you happen to mention independent investigative review. So let me just say, I look forward to that next legislation that you are now talking about, because when there is an incident of police shooting or killing that happens, we need an independent person that can come in, particularly if a person is resulting in death, that can look at these issues, because in many cases, the DAs are very common with those police officers, and we need to make sure that there is something and somebody who's looking at it from an objective viewpoint. All of these and many more will help us. Again, thank you for receiving my statement today. God bless you, and continue to keep up your good work.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Bland. Thank you so much for those powerful words and putting this all in perspective. And I think you're absolutely right. That we have to do a lot of things. This is not going to be any one piece of legislation, but cumulative. As we keep putting these things together, we can make substantial change, and we have to deal with it. So we have to certainly lean into community policing, and as Sheriff Napoleon talked about, is the power of that to connect with the community. And your stories showing that when you have an officer who's from the community, understands the community, has built the trust in that community is important. But we also have to make sure there's accountability when someone does cross the line and engages in an activity that is unacceptable. There needs to be an investigation, and it should be done by an independent entity, so that the community has faith that it was actually done properly. There are other pieces of legislation to deal with expanded training, to ban things such as chokeholds, of what we saw in the case with Mr. Floyd. A variety of those things have to come together, but the key thing is that we have to have action as well. I'm happy to say, in addition to both of you supporting this, both of you gentlemen supporting this legislation, it has broad support. I'm actually introducing this in a bipartisan way. Senator Cornyn from Texas, a Republican from Texas, is my principal co-sponsor. So we're doing it bipartisan. And then we have very important groups from the NAACP has endorsed it, the National Urban League and the Police Officers Association of Michigan, among others. And we're continuing to get support for this. So as these packages move through the Senate, and hopefully we can move them through as early as next week, we can start having this kind of discussion. This bill can be a part of that discussion, and we can move it forward so that we're strengthening community policing in our community. So again, thank you, Sheriff Napoleon, Dr. Bland, thank you for being here.